Wouldn't you rather be in the house of the Lord than outside in the heavy rain right now? We'd rather be here anyway, right? We're going to continue in reviewing the city of Jerusalem, talk to you a little bit more about our methodology this evening, and progress a little bit further. Before we do all that, we ought to have a word of prayer. So let's bow together, please, shall we? Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the rain that you provide. We have come to know you as a God that provides and times everything so perfectly. And for both the sunshine and the rain, we give you thanks for that. Thank you for a break in the weather. Thank you that we can be here together as the people of God. We ask your blessing on our fellowship, our time of the word here tonight, our time of prayer. And we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm going to rehearse quickly and move quickly in some of the areas where we have already spent some time. As we look at Jerusalem, there are a number of things that we are considering. In a very general way, we're tracking and acknowledging that Jerusalem is a city with a tremendous history. It predates the people of Israel. It has been on the map for different powers that exist in the world. It's, of course, in the sights, even crosshairs of groups and peoples around the world even today. But that Jerusalem is not only related to Israel is a fact. We could spend a lot of time talking about all the military campaigns that came through from Egypt and then from nations to the north and the east, and how Jerusalem was a very sought-after city because it is on the major trade route. But more particularly, we all are interested in Jerusalem because it is the center of the Israeli people's whole life and existence. So it's where Jerusalem in the Bible and the people of Israel all come together. Our ears perk up and we lift our eyes up and we come to life because Jerusalem and Israel, and now we're really paying attention. There's a third level here as well, and that is that not just because Jerusalem is the holy city and it is the center of attention and activity for Israel, it's because the worship of God is geographically marked with the coordinates that are Jerusalem. So now we expand our view, and we'll consider a little bit of that tonight. We're going to start moving into the temple of God. So Jerusalem, not just Jerusalem, but the temple of God in Jerusalem. So it's all of Jerusalem, it's all of Israel, but it's also Jerusalem and the temple. When I say the temple, now we need to at least realize the temple has gone through a history itself. So as we come to learn a little more about Jerusalem and the temple, well, there isn't just one temple, and it's destroyed, and then it's rebuilt. There's also another temple. It's called the Second Temple per se, which was enlarged and built by Herod. So Herod took what was in existence, but he made it great and grand. It's the Second Temple that now shows up in the time of Christ. So that's the temple now that Jesus was visiting as a child and where he returned as the Redeemer. So Jerusalem is early in Israeli history, but it's not just one temple. So there are other things that are all going on with that. We saw the topographical map. Would like to have you stay focused on that along the way. I am really aware that it's challenging to grasp this looking at a 2D flat reproduction. You can see, because if you read topographical markings, you can see where the circles, the lines come together quickly. You're talking about a very steep ascent or descent, so it's got to be almost cliff-like. But where the lines are spread out a little more, then that makes it a little more of a slope that's gentle and kind. But I want you to know there are 5 mountains, and we're going back through that very quickly, and then you need to know the valleys. So the mountains are as follows, starting in the top northeast corner, Mount Scopus. Not a lot is done with that Bible history-wise, really. And it's Josephus that first begins to mention that in his writings. But we know the Mount of Olives, of course, and we also know a little bit about the Hill of Offense. And that's because it took a historical forefront in Solomon's day when he disobeyed God and married many, many, many wives. And this was the place where he began to allow them to set up shrines and to worship pagan gods. And thus it became known as the Hill of Offense. So we find that in Scripture, although not a lot of time and space is allocated to that, it's certainly a very important and wrong move on Solomon's part. Mount Zion is the name that we think of and read of most often when we think of the reign of Christ or the rule of the king, because Mount Zion is that which smacks of power, control, and the great leadership of our God. And so Mount Zion is a kingly identification. And then finally Mount Moriah, which becomes actually the Temple Mount. And we can identify the temple and redemption and eventually the reign of Christ there as well. We went back and looked in the historic books, and we saw Mount Moriah listed back in Genesis, the land of Moriah where Abraham would offer his son Isaac. And the link shows up later on. Tradition is pretty well established that the land of Moriah specifically, as God took Abram to a place he would show him. And now we have the listing of that in 1 Chronicles with Solomon on Mount Moriah. And clearly the verbiage in Genesis, which Abraham uses for his dear son, his only son, his son of promise, his unique one-of-a-kind son, is exactly the wording in the New Testament that God uses for his son. Of Isaiah, or rather of Isaac, Abraham says that he's to take, because God commanded him, take his son, his only son, his beloved son, and sacrifice him. And then when the baptism of Jesus occurred, a voice from heaven declared, "This is my beloved son, hear him." And he's called the only begotten, the one and only unique son, the one of a kind. There's no other. And don't get confused again, as some of the occultic groups and others do. When Jesus is called the Son of God, he's not called a birth son of God. He's called son by position. There are a number of different synonyms and words. But Jesus is the unique son positioned. But he is eternal. He has been here as long as God the Father has been. And we won't start counting. We're not going to do the math on that because it doesn't stop. But Jesus was here when time first began. He was already here. So we understand that. We're aware of Mount Zion being there. We're aware of the Hill of Offense. We're aware of the Mount of Olives as a favored place of prayer, named, as Pastor Bryden pointed out in his cultural series, the Olive Press, and then Mount Scopus as well. The valleys are quite significant. We'll get just a little better view of them briefly tonight. And we're traveling again down where that blue line just about intersects the black line. The black line represents the Kidron Valley, the blue line, the Central Valley, also called the Tyropaian Valley, and then the red line, the Valley of Hinnom. And they all converge and they travel down from here to the south and the east. But those valleys show up many, many times because if you're going to go to Jerusalem somewhere, you essentially have to cross a valley and then ascend. And the armies that came to defeat Jerusalem and take over to replace one government and one nation with their own would normally have to come some way. They would prefer not to cross the valleys because you're already exposing yourself as an army, because you take the depth of the valley geologically, add to that the height of the walls up on top, and it's quite a job for you to assault. So normally, armies would come in from the north, where the steep ascent is not there. It's easier to assault, and yet the fortifications of of those that control the city of Jerusalem are usually all lined up on the northern side. So I showed you this, a western hill there as well is an important part. And there are a number of different areas of Jerusalem, but as I began in introducing this here tonight, we're paying attention to a number of things that all converge in Jerusalem. And for the most part, we want to follow this temple-wise, and then on a second level, Jerusalem-wise, in a somewhat chronological fashion. And yet, we have to hop over a little bit of that here and there, because certain findings in Jerusalem in a certain area cover early, and then Old Testament, and then New Testament. And so certain things we'll probably mention anachronistically, but I think we can handle that as well. Pottery in Jerusalem discovered on David's hill, David's city, dates to 3200 BC. And those primitive peoples, wow, I'm really impressed. 3200 BC, and these are the pictures of them. These are the drawings of them. You understand that pottery is among the most common and familiar archaeological discovery. And when it comes to pieces of clay and pottery, handwriting from it could be hieroglyphics, it could be alphabetic, but it's always a clue to the time. The very ink that's used is a clue to the time. They changed inks along the way. They used the inky juice from a cuttlefish back at one time. So they have different inks and dyes and different pottery and different styles and different designs. And so they're able to locate this and to place it with other findings in different parts of the world and begin to match and understand a little history. But let's just pause a second. 3200 BC, let's say relative to Abraham. Give me a date for Abraham. 2000 or 2100 BC. This is 1100 years before Abraham. And when we run into Jerusalem in the fairly early time period, and Abraham is on the scene, and he's meeting up with the king, and his name is Melchizedek, 2100 BC, roughly. So we're going to back up 1100 years, and they're making pottery like that. This is David's city. I would like you to see at least something of what's involved in archaeology. That would be one thing to take away from this. Digging down, and you notice that the stones are normally not blocks that are chiseled and carved and shaped and edged. That will be something that develops over time. Now, they were doing that with the pyramids in Egypt. But generally speaking, a lot of times the people groups and cities are taking the round stones, whatever they have, and they put it together and will add a mortar. And so they hold it together like cement. But also notice how steep that is, because the more we look at the city of David, both on a topographical map and then the findings that are there, and I'll show you a couple of photographs here coming up shortly, you're going to say, wow, they really built on a side hill, didn't they? Yes, they did. And they were able to fortify certain portions of that, and that's how they could protect it as well. Now, anachronistically, we're looking at some things. Warren is a man who's identified with the discovery in the late 1800s of Warren Shaft. There are different bodies of water. There's one spring, Gihon Spring, and that lay on the outside of the city walls because it's far enough downhill that when they're building the wall and they're building their houses and they're building all of their buildings for occupation and for civil use, it's further up the hill. So now you have a problem. There's only one source of fresh water, and Gihon Spring is it. How do you get to that? And so there are a number of different drawings that are reenactments or illustrations of how this all works. But what you can see is that we have a shaft in the background, and then we have digging down, and then a vertical shaft straight down, and the Gihon Spring, which is then channeled into a pool and into a spring that would hold the water. And so in times of peace, people could walk down. They'd come down the steps out of the city, take their jars, fill it with water, and walk back up. But under siege, why, the enemy knows, and they're nearby, and you can't get to the water. So what do? So actually, the Israeli people, and there's quite a bit of discussion about exactly when this happened, but they were able to tunnel and to dig and carve and find a way to disguise the opening and the source of the water. So they were able to supply the people inside the city secretly. But that's a worn shaft. There is David's city, and I've circled it there. It's like a peninsula, but you notice on the right-hand side, that's the Kidron Valley. And you just begin to get a little feel for how steep it is, because the digging and the what is found is right along that side there. A lot of excavation there. And I just showed you some pictures, and you saw how steep the side hill, how far down they're digging. And that's just the beginning of what they've discovered there. And we read together 2 Samuel 5, where David took the city. And so with the Jebusites on the inside, David found his way into the city, it would seem, from backtracking through the spring and then getting in that way. We've got a lot of maps that we could look at and study. I'm actually just going to rifle through most of them. The lower map on the right there, you can see the city of David, and above that, you'll also see the Temple Mount. So this is all downhill, going from the Temple Mount all the way down, and this peninsula keeps going down. So down here is where it's between the Mount of Olives and David's city that the Kidron Valley runs, but it's quite a steep place. Another view of that from another map there, which actually is quite well done, but it gives you a little more of a relief picture of it. Ancient Jerusalem was this way, but you also now can see that we've got a number of things here. We've got a spring tower. There was a tower there to protect the spring, and so whoever occupied Jerusalem would certainly have a guards that were there. And the Gihon Spring, the pool tower, Hezekiah's tunnel also is there. Quite a story about the discovery of that. Pastor Bryden showed some of that as well. Another illustration, a drawing of David's city with Mount Moriah up on top. So once again, you get a little idea of the size and the scope. By comparison to large cities today, and even Jerusalem today, not really much, but there are a number of things there. And some speculation as to where David's palace was. There has been a building discovered that was quite a large open area, and so it's been put forth that probably is David's palace, but there's nothing there that gives us proof positive that's what it was, but it may well be the case. Another drawing of that, but you begin to see something of the steepness of the surrounding hillside. And again here, you're looking at it, and it isn't just this area up in here, it's also clear down here. And we're not even down in the valley yet. So on that side hill, there are a lot of structures that are still being uncovered and unearthed even today. So again, the Temple Mount up above there, the side hill where all the excavations are taking place all along through here, and the valley down below. Now we're looking from the north. This gives you another idea. And actually, this is the excavation that we were just looking at, this whole area in here. We're looking now from the north, and this is the valley down below. So that's quite a hill. And you can see where an army that was attacking would be at a disadvantage trying to climb that kind of a hill. And again, from the north, a little closer view, you see even the steps that are there. These steps are quite original, and they go down into the valley. And don't forget, when Jesus left the Lord's Supper and went to the Garden of Gethsemane, he left from the other side of the city of David, from Mount Zion, the upper room, and he went down and crossed the Gihon Spring and then the Kidron Valley, and then ascended the other side, which is the Mount of Olives. So he may well actually walk downstairs here, or he may have crossed over down a little bit further south. At the south end, we're looking back up, and you can see the excavations just a little bit out of sight, but they're up there. And there. And there. This is Canaanite. This is pre-David. This is 12th or 13th century BC. So this is Jebusite control, Canaanite control. So this is what they found, and there's what appears to be a house structure with a post, a pillar there, but a lot of this is still being unearthed even today. From the upper side, you can look down and see it there, and from the front, and from the side. And there are the steps. You can see some steps there, but a steep ascent. And wow, lo and behold, what a find. Wouldn't you love, imagine if you could put that in your suitcase and bring that home and say, guess what I found in David City? You didn't know that they had such developments like this ingenuity, but they did. Now, where it all went from here is maybe not anything, that's too much information. But that is a toilet, and it does come from David City. Now we're looking at Warren Shaft. We'll be looking at a few slides from Warren Shaft and Hezekiah's tunnel. There's someone digging in the background there, someone climbing through there. This is a pretty well designed and laid out to scale and everything, Warren Shaft system. And you can see where from within the city, and then climbing down in there and the vertical shaft and over, and then being able to find a way to get the water and then get it back up in the city for the people that are held hostage up there. And so a little more graphic design to give you more detail and so on. And this again going down. This is the pool of Siloam, or as they would pronounce it there, Siloam. And you know of New Testament occurrences there. This is John 9, the man who was blind. This is it. The pool of Siloam is fed by the spring Gihon. And so they've carved a channel to get some of the water into this pool. But that shows up in New Testament. And so here it is in David City. Hezekiah's tunnel. The inscription here that describes, and this was found on the side wall, and it describes their working from two opposite ends. And Pastor Bright did a good job explaining that. And they could hear the two groups are coming together from a long distance apart, trying to make this fit together. It was very possibly just ahead of Hezekiah's time or in his time. But they could hear each other chiseling with a pick and with tools. And they came very, very close, and they were able to adjust just in the last few feet, so they met head on. And now since they worked from two opposite ends, they now had a way to access the water in a secretive way. Long ways down, and they've certainly enlarged this since. There is a mark, a line up high. Not sure if you can see it in this photograph. There is a mark up here, and there's one on the other side. This has been dug down deeper in modern times to make it easier for people to get in. And this is the shaft from the top looking down. Hezekiah's tunnel. This again is a picture of David's city. Side hill, Kidron Valley on the left. We're looking from the north down toward the south. Now, this is where we want to begin to pause a little bit, because coming to terms with Solomon's temple is such a key part of Jerusalem. So if there's one consistent highlight in Jerusalem, it's the story of the temple. The temple is a continuation of the tabernacle. God said, I will choose the place. You will not worship me just wherever you feel like worshiping me. Under every green tree or on a hilltop, you will worship where I tell you to worship. And it proved to be Jerusalem. The tabernacle was temporary in the wilderness, and they brought that, of course, into Palestine. So there it is in Israel. But it was not until David bought the threshing floor on the top of Mount Moriah that he owned the land, and that would be the place. That's where the temple is going to be built. But David had to take the city, which then became renamed David's city, the city of David. But he had to conquer that in order to push out the Jebusites. The Jebusites are one of those groups that God said you will surely drive them out. And so there's a list of 7 enemies of God and of the people of God, and there's no way you can be at peace with them because they will sacrifice your children to their gods. You will become just like they are. They're evil, wicked people. And the Jebusites were among that group. So David had to defeat them, and now it remained for Solomon to build the temple. So you can get a little look at the temple on the right. These are simply drawings, and I can give you a little better picture of it here shortly. But again, the temple area is up to the north, and then David's city is further to the south and lower down. Solomon's temple, by comparison, there's a football field, and there was Solomon's temple. When you look at the holy place, the Holy of Holies, and then in comparing Solomon's temple with Herod's temple, I told you it was enlarged. I guess so. Solomon's temple, Herod's temple. I'm pretty sure that had to really irk the Israeli people to have Herod do so much on the temple, and they would just soon have Herod stay out of it. But Herod was a master designer, master builder, and he wanted the fame and the notoriety. So he had a number of major building projects through all of Palestine, and this certainly was one of them. So I'm going to be talking to you more about that. We're going to slow down, take a little time on Herod's temple when we get that far. And there's the Holy of Holies. It's a little light here with all the lights on, but I at least would point you to the cherubim. Now there's the ark. And this is one person's idea of the cherubim that guarded the ark. Wow. Now our concept would be that there are cherubim that are part of the lid, and so they're not monstrous in size. But I can tell you that in other temples, worldwide, in Nineveh and in other temples, they had these gargantuan-sized cherubim, and they would be half lion, and they would be winged, and they would guard the entrance to the temple and the palace where the king was. So this is not novel with the Israeli people. I think that this concept is well known, and that Jehovah God, because of his majesty, has creatures that stand guard. Not that he needs to be protected, but his regality is very conspicuous. But anyway, you get a picture here of what this would look like. And the holy place, table of showbread over there, the candlesticks, the altar of incense there, and so on. So here's the city of David again, in the foreground, center, with the road on the right following the Kidron Valley going north, and with the Temple Mount up above. So this gives you a little idea. Now what you're looking at here, don't forget, is the modern phase of the temple. So we're going to track Jerusalem first from occupation and invasion by the Egyptians, controlled by the Jebusites. David overthrew them. Israel controls for a period of time. Solomon follows his father David, builds the temple on the Temple Mount, but it isn't long before Israel is in disarray, and the north and the south split, and they're sinning one commandment breach at a time until God says, time to go. So they're exiled. And also, when Nineveh comes in, when Assyria shows up, and then when the Babylonians come in, they just completely level. So the temple from Solomon's day is in such disrepair that not a stone is on top of another stone. So after the exile, 70 years of captivity, remember? They're out of the country. And now Ezra leads a group back, and Nehemiah leads a group back, and there are one or two others that also are bringing some of the survivors and those that would be willing to return. And first off, they rebuild the temple, and then they rebuild the walls. So that's in Ezra and Nehemiah's time. They're rebuilding the temple. But it's not really until Herod's time that we have what's known as the Second Temple, because too many interruptions and too many challenges and problems that are there. So you can see here as well the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, and the city of David down here. So that leaves us in a spot where we're going to be able to go through. You will see the enlargement, and you can see Solomon's job was to put up the temple, and David, of course, began down here. And there's another view of Solomon's temple, and we're going to, and a gorgeous drawing and rendering of the temple. And can you imagine having a temple like that? And this is the brazen altar up here, and the laver, and the inside of the holy place with the golden candlesticks. Wow. We really don't know what it looked like, but it had to be something. And when Israel was finally put out of the land, they lost all that. And when they came back, remember the weeping. Some of them weeping tears of joy because they were born in captivity. They'd never seen the temple. They were born away from home. But some tears of regret for all the lost time because they had disobeyed God, were forced out of the land. So we're going to come back to Solomon's temple. A few more facts and details. Inauguration Day, when the temple services were dedicated to the Lord. And this would be an assignment, just do a little Bible search and find out how many animals were sacrificed on the day that the temple opened and Solomon dedicated the temple. You're going to be shocked. But we want to immerse ourselves in that aspect of Israeli culture because it's so different from us. And then we're going to move on from there. Coming to Herod's temple, I think you're going to really enjoy as well. But I'm going to stop right here. We won't go further, but I have maps on maps on maps. There's Herod, time of Jesus, and we just keep on going and keep on going. The city today, there it is today. So we'll come back to this. I want to talk to you about the gates of the city, the four quarters of Jerusalem. We certainly need to talk about the Muslim overtake, the Crusader period. Jerusalem really suffered during all those Middle Ages, really just terribly. And they're still waiting for the Messiah to come. Too bad they missed him the first time around. But I think they're gonna find him the second time around. So we'll pause there. We'll pick up a little bit later. We're going to switch over now to some missionary requests and then some general.